a simple HTML5 project, a lot of these projects are built to use any of the libraries that are available. So in this case, it comes standard with Cordova. So you can actually set up a project straight away running these libraries. You've also got ME, Maven, PHP group. So let's go for a nice colourful one. And let's choose that. And what NetBeans will do now is it'll give me sensible defaults for all of them. And you'll see it's created a project. NetBeans has several different viewpoints. So I can either look at it from a project point of view, I can look at it from the flat files, and NetBeans has its own little section where it can tuck things away. NetBeans does a lot of work behind the scenes as well, so because I'm using the ANT version, it's built the ANT file that allows me to build the file, run the file, deploy the file, and I can actually script my code to make use of NetBeans as part of a scripted environment, which is really nice. I've also got services, so I can plug into Derby, I can plug into continuous integration, I can plug into Glassfish. So there's a lot of functionality, and I can add additional tabs there for favorites, bookmarks, and so forth. So let's have a look and see what it's done. Okay, here we have a file, and it is 325 lines long. So it's got comments in it, it's nicely documented, and you can learn quite a lot from it as well. I have to confess that I didn't actually know that you could leave out a main method in a JavaFX application until I read this. But it also gives you an excellent starting point, so you can see that in the JavaFX application we have it's the debug, it comes later. Okay, so we have a nice little standalone JavaFX application which I can pretend that I wrote, but more importantly I can go into the code and I can actually see what's going on and I can understand it. NetBeans also has a really nice history function, so what I can now actually do is I can edit it, okay, and I can switch to the history. And you can see that it's tracking the history of the file for me. And what you can also do is to actually add comments in here. So this makes it really easy for me just to record what's going on in the history and see what's going on. And then I can switch back to source code. There are an awful lot of functions built into NetBeans. I'd have to spend the whole day showing you all of them. So I'm not going to show them, but I'm just going to tell you there's lots and lots of everything you'd expect from an IDE there. So that gives us the ability to use the code examples in multiple languages, set them up and run them. So let's go back to the talk. Okay, so not only do good artists steal code, once they've still built their code, they also want to be able to test it. And here you can see the screenshot from some of my code. So let's go into NetBeans and do that. So this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually debug the file. And you'll notice I have a breakpoint here, so it's stopped. And if I move over things, it will tell me what's going on. You will also notice that we have, unfortunately I'm in low res mode here, let's try and get rid of it. We have some additional menu options which have appeared. Let's find them. That's the debugging. And again, it's trying to make use of the screen space. So what I can also do is I can step over, and again, when I hover on something, I can drive the whole thing from the keyboard. So I can actually step over the functionality and see what's going on. And at any point, I can inspect the value. What I can also actually do, which is also quite clever, is I can actually change the values. So I can actually go down to everything I've got open down here. Okay, and let's go back to the top. Okay, so we've got debugging code, and the toolbar at the top is also context sensitive. So as I change functions, they will change. Everything in NetBeans is context sensitive. Okay, the next thing you want to be able to do with code is you want to be able to test it. When we write code, we want to make sure that the code is still working the way we think it's still working. So what you can do is you can write what are called unit tests, which run and generate a value and check that something's happening. And what's also really nice is you can build them into your own code. So this is one of my projects, and I have a directory for the source code, and I also have my test packages. And in the same locations you will find that I have got some classes. And what works really well in this is because I'm building everything in NetBeans, I can run it from NetBeans, and I can also run it continuously. And then if the continuous tests fail, I can come back to NetBeans and see what's going on. So here, I've run a unit test, which is testing my methods. And if you're familiar with unit tests, what it will do, sorry, wrong class, is it will insert some code to set up a test, tear down a test, and then run the test. NetBeans also makes it really easy to actually write these tests in the first place. So I have a class here that has no tests, which is a problem for me. So let's find the class. There it is. And wouldn't it be nice if I could just go there and I could say create a test, and I got a pop-up window which gave me options. I could choose which test framework I wanted to use. I could tell it exactly how I want the code to work. I could just click on OK, and it would just build me a skeleton test class that I could go to, and it would set up all the code for me. It would make a reasonable guess on what the most methods would do. It would be set up so that I'm ready to write the tests, set the tests up, write some test code. So NetBeans makes it really easy to add tests to your Java code. And what you can also do is you can use, what we also do is there's another framework, because not only do we want to test the code, but we want to test how the code works, particularly in the GUI. So what we have is we have some code which allows us to run the code from the GUI interactively. And again, we can run it in NetBeans, or we can run it on a box continuously. So what this code is doing is it's running our IDE, it's doing some searching, it's checking the values, and it's then using some Java code to check that it always gets the same results back. We find this tremendously helpful for testing. In particular, in our viewer, we print out 50 different versions of it. When we print out, we have 50 different print options. So we want to test those all the time. So the way it tests it is we have a piece of code sitting on a box. Every time we make a code commit, it prints out 50 versions to file, checks the differences. If I started telling my developers they had to manually test all those options every time they made a code change, I would have a revolt on my hands. But we get the boxes to do it for us automatically. And you can see it's moving to the other documents. Okay, so we've got testing, we've got debugging. What other goodies have we got in store for you? Writing better code quicker. As a software developer, I want to just get on with writing my code and do as little tedious stuff as possible. So what I want to be able to do is, let's close this project. Oh, sorry, let's keep this project open. Is to be able to say, actually, I want a new class. So let's go there and let's choose new. And all these options will be context sensitive depending on what I'm trying to do. So I want a new Java class. Okay. And a Java class has a static main something or other method. I can never remember what the exact syntax says. Can anyone remind me? Luckily for me, I could just press Control Space and up pops this rather useful little help menu. And you'll see it has a little speech bubble. You can build in all of these functions here. So I don't need to remember what it is because it will appear there. And then it will make it very easy for me to write some code. I can also use Control Tab and it will make suggestions. At the moment it hasn't compiled. So we need to import file. Okay. Now we've imported file. Doesn't like something up there. Doesn't it like... Sorry. You'll also notice it's compiling it as it goes along. So as I complete bits of the code, the rest starts working. there. Notice it's left my cursor ready to type the code. So a lot of what NetBeans has built into the IDE is there to make you write code and get away from the more tedious activities. What's also really nice is these functionalities are in the IDE, not in Java, so when you move to other languages you'll find it works the same. So that is writing the code. We can also configure the IDE very, very precisely. So if I go to Preferences here, you will find that here's the editor. So we can actually set up how the text is displayed. So again, some people happen to like their code, let's do the braces. Some people happen to like their class declarations on the same line. Some like them on a new line. Some people like their if-else's to be set up in a certain way. Some people like their imports set up so they use global imports. Some people have very specific ways they want to do spaces. And again, you can have different settings for different languages. So all you Fortran programmers in the audience, you can use NetBeans to write Fortran in. And notice JavaScript, JSON, HTML5. What's also very useful here is I can actually export the values. The only thing NetBeans won't do for you, it won't solve the arguments about whether you put braces on the lines and whether you use spaces or tabs. You have to sort that out for yourself, but it will actually allow you to come up with some rules, and NetBeans will automatically add that to the code. Okay, so here we have a project. Now you'll notice that I have color coding on these files, which tells me that something's happened to them. And I'm using Mercurial as my plugin. And if I go here, yeah, I can see there's a keyboard. These are the shortcuts. So this tells me that I have some code changes here. And again, one of the things that really stands out to me in NetBeans over the other tools is as I move down, I'm on a single commit, so I jump seamlessly between files. Useful for me. Okay, what NetBeans also will do is it will allow us to give us an opinion on project data. So, I'm going to run a function called inspect and transform. This allows me to have a set of rules or hints that I can run on the code and it will spot things, silly mistakes, like if you use equals for a string comparison, and also whether you're using new functions. So let's run this. The code base I'm running it on is 342,000 lines of code. So it's done 30%. While it's finishing that off, I have two pieces of advice if you're using tools for looking at the code. I'm going to look at the transforms, I'm going to talk about PMD and find bugs. And they are, first of all, make sure that when you start, if you use the default settings, it will tell you that you have 30,000 things wrong with your code. A lot of those might just be that you're using braces in a different way to the standard rule set, and it's very depressing. So what I would recommend is that you actually switch all the rules off, choose the rules that are important to you, and then gradually switch them on. The second piece of advice I have is that when you actually run a code analyzer on your code, you will spot all sorts of embarrassing mistakes in it that you have made. So before you let anyone else loose with a code advisor on the code, make sure you corrected your mistakes. Then you can laugh at them for having made such silly mistakes as string equals a value. So I've now run this, and it's picked up two possible changes. The first one is it's spotted that I've got an unused import in the code. And the second one is it's spotted because some of my coders, some of the guys who work for me as developers, they started before these commands were introduced. They're not necessarily familiar with isEmpty. So I can see in this line there is a mistake, and I can see that I could actually use isEmpty there. So what I'd also like to do is I'd like to be able to know who wrote that code. So if I go to show annotations, okay, so what I can do is I can use NetBeans to autocorrect the code, and I know that Leon committed that code change. I can even see the code committee committed it on. So I need to quietly remind him that isEmpty is much better than .size equals 0. And again, all of this is standard functionality in NetBeans. So I need to have a word with Leon when I get home. Okay, what we can also use is we could actually, I'm not going to run it now because this takes longer, on the inspect and transform, there are some other interesting options as well. One of them is to migrate it to Java 8. If you run this on some code, it will spot all your anonymous inner classes, and it will suggest transforming them into Lambda options. So it makes it very easy to upgrade the code base that you're using. And again, you can choose to take all of the changes or some of the changes. You can also run single inspections, and also it's context sensitive. So if I only want to look at one file, okay, I can actually run the inspection on just that file, and it will tell me just what I need to change on that file. To plugins, okay, and you can install new plugins or you can delete plugins. And there's a set of plugins which are not installed by default but which can be added. So when we set it up, we switch off the Subversion, CVS, and other support because we just use Mercurial, and we had a couple of plugins we want to use like PMD. But NetBeans is highly modular, and it will also track the plugins and see if they've been updated. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is you can actually use NetBeans as a platform. You can think of NetBeans as a super powerful version of Swing, which you can build applications on top of. And it's a complete development environment. So what we've done here is we have a Java FX viewer. We actually built an open source version so we can put it into NetBeans. Again, we have a special type of NetBeans project. So you see there's a different icon. NetBeans will allow us to build the NetBeans modules so we can install it on machines. We can run it in NetBeans. Here you can see when I run it, it fires up a second copy of NetBeans. So I can debug the plugin. What it does is it just allows us to display PDFs. The reason you might use NetBeans rather than Swing is the same reason you'd use an IDE rather than just writing the text manually. Is because there's a lot of functionality that's been built into it, heavily tested. So in this case, you will notice when I open the page, I've already got a document there. So this is from my university. That's the guy who taught me most of the stuff I know about Byzantium. He's looking a bit older than he was when he taught me. And what's happened here in NetBeans is able to save the information for the Swing component. So if I show you the code briefly for the application, there is actually very little code in a NetBeans plugin. So you can build plugins in NetBeans which allow you to add functionality onto NetBeans, or you can build a complete application on top of NetBeans. NetBeans is also very clever at putting what you need with it. So when you do the build and deploy, NetBeans will only include what it needs to run for runtime libraries. If you're at Java 1, you will have seen Boeing and NASA building some big platform applications on top of I actually went back and reread several chapters because they had a lot of information I didn't know. It's an EPUB, you can buy a copy and the authors keep updating it. So it's highly recommended. There are some links here. If you want to try NetBeans, go to the NetBeans website, netbeans.org. NetBeans is provided by Oracle. Oracle's a commercial company in an unusual move for a commercial company, but I'm not complaining. NetBeans is completely free. When I started coding in '97, I was spending 300 quid on a Java IDE. Now you can get a free IDE, which is much, much more powerful than the one I used. We regularly write on NetBeans and Java-related topics on our blog at IDRsolutions. We have a free PDF to HTML5 converter, which we built on top of NetBeans, which you're welcome to try. I am here all day. My purpose being here is to talk to you lot, chat to anyone. So come and talk to me about NetBeans, come and talk to me about Java, come and talk to me about PDF, come and talk to me about 9th century iconoclasm in the Byzantine Empire if you like.